My name is Viola Ortega, and I'm 26 years old. But if I'm being honest, the real version of me didn't begin at 26. The story you're about to hear, my story, started unraveling long before adulthood, long before I had language for things like manipulation, guilt, conditioning, or emotional invisibility. The roots braided themselves deep, slipping under every milestone of my childhood until one day they became impossible to ignore. I didn't always understand the quiet, sinking ache of being the easy daughter, the one who kept the peace, the one who needed nothing, the one expected to understand always. But I learned eventually that easy was just another word for overlooked. That was the beginning of my unraveling long before I had the courage to walk away. But if I had to choose a single moment when everything shifted, it would be the day my parents told me I was not allowed to apply for college. Not because we couldn't afford it, not because I wasn't capable, not even because they had bigger dreams for me. No, because my older sister Rachel had flunked out, and my success apparently would hurt her feelings. Even now at 26, that sentence presses into me like a bruise you don't remember getting. Back then I was 17, and naive, and desperate, painfully desperate for anyone in my own home to see me. Rachel is 2 years older than me. The sun rose and set on her in our parents' eyes. It was like she existed under a spotlight that followed her everywhere, and I existed in the dim edges beyond the stage, their golden daughter, their fragile masterpiece, their eternal project. If Rachel crashed the car, the roads were icy. If she failed a class, the teacher was biased. If she exploded at them during dinner, she was under stress and trying her best. But me, if I got a 97 instead of 100, they asked where the other 3 points went. I remember being 9, standing in the kitchen holding a perfect math test in both hands. I'd practiced for weeks making flashcards and solving equations under a tiny desk lamp late at night. I carried that paper to my mother the way other children carried wounded birds, careful, trembling, hopeful. She glanced at it and said, "You're good at math, Viola. Rachel's the one who needs the encouragement." That was the script. Rachel needed the attention. Rachel needed the protection. Rachel needed the bigger slice, the front seat, the praise, the excuses. I learned early that my job was to be stable, cooperative, predictable, to take up the least possible space so Rachel could take up all of it without guilt. By high school, the patterns were so baked in that I hardly thought about them. I excelled quietly, advanced classes, honor roll, a part-time job, extracurriculars. I didn't do these things to shine. I did them for options, a future, a way out. Somewhere deep down, I believed if I built a life strong enough, I wouldn't need the approval I never got. Rachel, meanwhile, bounced between high schools, failed multiple classes, and lived in a constant storm of drama. But she was the delicate vase my parents kept dusting, even when it cracked in new places every week. I was the duct tape holding the family infrastructure together. The day I chose to apply to colleges in secret was also the day I realized how tired I was of being duct tape. I didn't tell my parents. I already knew what their reaction would be. I saved the money from my job, asked my favorite teacher, Mrs. Enders, for a recommendation letter, and mailed the applications quietly one by one from a post office 20 minutes from home so my parents wouldn't see me. I still remember the morning the acceptance letter arrived. I had applied to 6 schools. I got into 5. But the one in my hands was the one that mattered, a small but respected out-of-state university offering me a partial scholarship. Opening that envelope felt like someone had finally cracked a window in a house where I'd been suffocating for years. For the first time, I could see a version of myself that didn't need to shrink. I kept the letter tucked under my mattress for weeks, waiting for the right moment. The moment I imagined foolishly was a moment of pride. The real moment was something else entirely. It was a Sunday morning. Rachel had just come home from another disastrous community college semester. The air in the house was tight and stale, like everything inside was holding its breath. My parents were in the kitchen, Dad with his coffee, Mom rinsing dishes, Rachel scrolling on her phone at the table. I pulled the letter from my backpack, unfolded it carefully, and said I got into my top choice school. They offered me a scholarship. Silence, but not the stunned, joyful kind. This silence was cold, heavy-weighted, with something darker than disappointment. My mother didn't even look up. "Viola," she said, drying her hands on a towel. "We wish you had talked to us before doing something like this." My chest tightened. "What do you mean I got in? I thought you'd be happy." My father sighed, setting down his mug slowly, almost theatrically. "It's not that we're not proud," he said, choosing each word carefully. "It's just, We're still dealing with everything that happened with Rachel. College didn't work out for her. She needs support right now. Rachel didn't look up. She never did in moments that involve me. I'm not Rachel, I said quietly. That's not the point, my mother said sharper now. Don't you think it would hurt her? Watching you leave for college while she's struggling. That would be cruel, Viola. Cruel. The word landed like a slap. They continued calmly, rationally, like they were doing me a favor, explaining that college wasn't the right path right now, that I needed to prioritize family stability, that Rachel's mental health was delicate, that if I left, it could push her into a spiral. They told me to let go of this selfish dream. My mother even said, "You're talented, Viola. You'll find a more practical path closer to home." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt something inside me slip, not break, just release. That night, I stared at the acceptance letter under my desk lamp until the colors blurred. I felt betrayed, but the deeper wound was the familiarity of it. On some level, I had expected this. But what my parents didn't expect was me, the version of me that stopped waiting for permission. The next morning at 6 a.m., I rolled my suitcase into the kitchen. I left a note on the table. I'm not Rachel. I'm done pretending I have to be. I didn't hear from them for 6 months. Not a call, not a text, nothing. And that silence shaped the rest of my life far more than their words ever did. When I left home with the single suitcase, 2 changes of clothes, and just over $2,000 in savings, I felt strangely calm. Not triumphant, not rebellious, just weightless, like a tight knot had finally loosened in my chest. But peace is not the same as safety, and freedom is not the same as stability. That first week away was a blur of bus rides, borrowed couches, cheap sandwiches, and a constant gnawing fear that I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But the mistake would have been staying. A friend of mine, Naomi, let me stay on her couch for a few nights. She lived in a cramped apartment with 2 other students, all art majors, all perpetually broke in an almost romantic way. They had mismatched plates, posters taped to the walls, and a kitchen stove that needed to be kicked twice before it would turn on. But the apartment was loud with laughter, with people who said things like, "Follow your dream, babe," without irony. The first morning I woke up there wrapped in a blanket that smelled like acrylic paint and lavender detergent, I realized something. I hadn't woken up afraid. That was new. Still, I didn't want to overstay. I bounced between a few other places after that friends of friends, a coworker's spare room for a weekend. Even one long night in a public library lobby where the security guard pretended not to notice me dozing off in a corner chair. I got a job bussing tables at a 24-hour diner. The graveyard shift was rough, but it was steady, and that steady rhythm was something I clung to. There's a moment from those early months that I still think about often. I was wiping down a sticky booth around 3 a.m., half asleep, when an elderly woman in a thick blue coat stopped me. "You look tired, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft and creaky. I forced a smile. "Yeah, long shift." "No," she said gently. "I mean here." She touched her chest. "Your heart looks tired." I didn't know what to say. I still don't. She left a few minutes later, but her words stayed with me, because she wasn't wrong. Even though I was free, I was exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. The worst part wasn't struggling financially. It wasn't the hunger or the instability or the endless work. It was the silence, that penetrating, unforgiving silence from the people who had raised me. Not even a passive-aggressive voicemail, which my mother was famous for. There was nothing. It was as if I had been erased. And what hurts isn't being unwanted. It's realizing you were never needed to begin with. Sometimes at night after a double shift, I'd think about how my mother used to call me her steady girl, her easy one, her rock. I used to think that meant she admired me. Now I realized it meant she relied on me to absorb the pressure to carry the weight no one else wanted to carry, especially Rachel. I'd scroll through social media and see Rachel's life paraded around like a curated museum exhibit. New photos of her dinners, out her birthday celebrations, her fresh start posts. My old classmates messaged occasionally. "Hey, Viola, did you see your sister got a new car? Your mom posted pics from Rachel's birthday dinner. Looked fancy." Of course I saw it. I always saw it. The irony. That dinner, the one at the expensive steakhouse I had begged to go to for my 16th birthday. Instead, that year we ate spaghetti at home. Rachel took the last slice of garlic bread before I got any. I don't even think she noticed. But I kept my head down. I stayed focused. I enrolled in community college with the little money I saved. It wasn't my dream school, but at least it was mine. I studied business and computer science, picking up freelance gigs, editing resumes for other students, or designing logos for tiny online shops. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. Over time, the silence from my parents became less of a wound and more of a scar, still sensitive, but no longer bleeding. I built a small world around myself, filled with people who saw me because I showed up, not because they needed something from me. 2 years passed, then 3. Life didn't get easier, but it got sturdier. I eventually moved in with 2 other students from campus, sharing a cramped 3-bedroom with scuffed floors and a balcony that barely fit a potted plant. Rent was cheap. The neighborhood was loud. I felt alive. During this time, I met Evan Reyes, my boyfriend now, though back then he was just this quiet, sharply observant guy in my intro to programming class. He sat next to me one afternoon as I tried to debug a piece of code that refused to behave. "Your loop is missing a closing bracket," he whispered. I stared at the screen, startled. He was right. "Thanks," I murmured. He nodded, offering a small, warm smile that reached his eyes. Evan wasn't like the boys I grew up around. He didn't talk to fill silence. He listened. He cared about things deeply, but didn't make a spectacle of it. And he treated my ambition not as something inconvenient or intimidating, but as something admirable. Slowly, he became a part of my world. Quietly, steadily, the same way I had always tried to exist. And then came the day I graduated. It wasn't a massive university ceremony, just a modest event in a half-full auditorium. But when they called my name, Viola Ortega Associate Degree in Computer Science and Business Administration, my chest swelled in a way I had never felt before, because I had done this. Alone. When I walked across that stage cap, slipping slightly, the applause felt like validation I had chased my entire childhood. I took one photo afterward. Just one. Me in my gown, holding my diploma, smiling in a way that felt real. I posted it on social media with a simple caption. "Didn't think I'd make it? Glad I didn't listen to people who told me not to try." It wasn't meant to provoke anyone. I wasn't trying to rub anything in Rachel's face. I wasn't even thinking about my parents at all. But within 2 hours, the storm arrived. My phone started buzzing with call attempts from my mother. I didn't pick up. Then came the texts. "Viola, that post was hurtful. Rachel saw it and cried. Why would you try to humiliate her? We forgave you for the way you left. Please grow up." There it was again. The word they always used when I didn't bend mature. They wielded it like a weapon, a reminder that my feelings were inconvenient, that my achievements were provocations, that Rachel's fragility mattered more than my reality. I didn't respond, not out of spite, out of clarity. I wasn't going to step back into the role of the easy daughter again. Not after everything I'd built. And I had no idea that this small act, this refusal to shrink, would ignite a chain reaction I could never have predicted. If I had known what my parents' messages would set into motion, maybe I would have deleted the graduation post. Not because I regretted celebrating myself, but because I didn't yet understand what my success meant to them. To me, it was survival healing proof that I could build a life without permission. To them, it was a threat, a disruption to the family narrative where Rachel was the fragile heroine and I was the reliable understudy who never stepped into the light. After the graduation chaos, I didn't hear from them for months. The silence didn't surprise me anymore. I had learned to expect love only where it was offered freely, not demanded in exchange for self-erasure. I kept pushing forward. I had completed community college, but I wasn't done. I enrolled in online courses so I could keep working while studying. I picked up part-time IT support shifts for a small local business, Fixed Printers, that jammed every 20 minutes, taught elderly customers how to reset their passwords, and spent late nights scribbling ideas for a project that kept tugging at me. It started small, just a simple concept. What if building a resume didn't feel like guessing what employers wanted? What if the process could be smarter, clearer, more empowering? I didn't have money, I didn't have connections, but I had something I never had growing up, the belief that if I didn't take myself seriously, no one else ever would. So I created wireframes, built prototypes, pulled Evan in to test features, and slowly, piece by piece, I created the early version of what would later be called LineLift, my resume building platform. Evan was the only person who knew how driven I really was, not because I announced it loudly, but because he noticed the nights I fell asleep at the keyboard, the way my shoulders tensed when lines of faulty code mocked me, the tiny victories when something finally worked. He supported me quietly without fanfare. He brought me sandwiches when I forgot to eat, listened when I doubted myself, and never once made me feel like ambition was something to apologize for. One night after we spent hours refining a feature that ranked resume sections by employer relevance, I leaned back exhausted but proud. Evan reached over, brushed a loose strand of hair behind my ear, and said, "You know, Viola, people are going to talk about this someday." I laughed tiredly. "Talk about what a resume tool that barely functions." "No," he said. "A woman who built her life from nothing because no one else would build it for her." His words landed in a part of me I didn't realize was still tender. Sometimes I wondered why it was so easy for someone who wasn't blood to see me, while the people who raised me never tried. Maybe that's why I held on to Evan so tightly. He didn't just witness my journey, he honored it. The platform took off slowly. A few friends shared it, then a classmate posted about it on Twitter. A career coach requested a demo. A recruiter told me it was surprisingly good for a one-woman project. And then unexpectedly, a small VC firm reached out. They invited me to speak at a minor startup showcase, nothing huge, but for someone who used to sleep in library chairs, it felt monumental. When I walked up to the microphone that night, wearing the only blazer I owned, purchased secondhand for $6, I felt a shift inside me. Not confidence exactly, but the realization that the world contained possibilities my family never imagined for me. When the event posted a photo afterward, my parents didn't congratulate me. They didn't acknowledge it at all. Instead, 3 weeks later, my father left a voicemail. "Hey, Viola, your mom and I saw some things online. Looks like you're doing well. Maybe we could catch up sometime." Catch up, as if we were old classmates, not estranged family members. I didn't call back. 2 more months passed. LineLift grew steadily. My user numbers increased. A small magazine wrote a profile about innovative career tools created by young developers. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like validation. Something solid. Something mine. And then the text came. From Rachel. Just 3 words. "Look at you." No punctuation, no warmth, no acknowledgement of years of silence and cruelty. Just a vague statement that could have meant anything: admiration, resentment, entitlement. With Rachel, it was always all 3. I didn't reply. Another week passed. Then my mother called. This time I let it ring twice before I answered. "Viola," she said brightly, too brightly. "It's so good to hear your voice." I stayed quiet. She continued talking as though filling the silence with sugary words might soften everything that came next. How proud they were, how impressed they were by my work, how they always knew I'd do well. It was almost comical how easily they rewrote themselves as supportive parents. Then came the real reason for the call. "So, sweetheart," she said, voice softening with the false maternal concern. "I knew far too well your sister has been going through a hard time." I closed my eyes. I knew exactly where this was going. "She's trying to get back on her feet," my mother said. "She just needs a little help. We were thinking maybe she could join your company. Something entry-level, something stable. She's great with people." I nearly laughed. Rachel, who had dropped out of multiple colleges, flaked on every job she'd ever held, and still blamed the world for her failures, was suddenly great with people. "She doesn't have a resume," I said flatly. "That's where you come in," my mother chirped. "You have that wonderful resume app, don't you?" It was astonishing how easily she said it, as though it were the most natural thing in the world to ask her younger daughter, the same one she kicked out to protect Rachel's feelings, to now hand Rachel a job. "I'm not doing that," I said. Her tone snapped instantly. "Viola, don't be like this. Rachel has been through so much. You've always had it easier." My laugh came out bitter. Easier, I left home at 17 and slept on floors. Rachel got steak dinners. "That's not fair," she shot back. Rachel needed support. And I didn't. Silence stretched between us. Then her voice softened again, but this softness was sharp, manipulative, the softness of a knife's edge. "Rachel is fragile, Viola. You're strong. You can handle disappointment. She can't." That was the moment the final string snapped. Not because she compared us, but because she revealed the truth I'd been circling for years. They didn't protect Rachel because she was weak. They protected her because acknowledging my strength meant admitting their neglect. And that was something they would never do. When I hung up, Evan was sitting on the couch across from me. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He knew the look on my face. "They want something from you," he said quietly. "Yeah," I whispered. "They want to rewrite the story." But they had no idea what was coming next. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to hold the pen. If there is one thing I learned from my family, it's that silence is never empty. Silence is a staging area. Silence is where the next blow is prepared. So when my parents stopped calling after I refused to give Rachel a job, I didn't relax, I waited. The quiet wasn't peace, it was pressure building. Meanwhile, my life kept moving forward. LineLift was growing faster than I had expected. The user base doubled within weeks, then tripled. A career development podcast asked me for an interview, and for the first time ever, I spoke honestly about the struggles of entering the workforce without support, without connections, without a safety net. I didn't mention my parents or Rachel. Not once. I didn't need to. The story was about people like me, people who built a future out of scraps. The interview got more attention than I anticipated. A professor reached out asking if I'd be willing to guest lecture a class one day. A nonprofit wanted to collaborate. A recruiter sent a message saying, "Your tool is brilliant. We need more people like you in tech." And with every piece of recognition, every small spark of validation, I felt a shift I hadn't felt since childhood. The sense that maybe my worth wasn't conditional after all. Then it happened. One late afternoon, about 3 months after my mother's, Rachel's fragile speech, I received a message from a friend in the recruiting field. It said, "Congrats to your sister, just saw the announcement. That's amazing of you." Then a screenshot. And there it was. Rachel's LinkedIn post. A full professional headshot, a long caption. Hashtags, the whole polished, fraudulent performance. After a difficult personal journey, I'm excited to join the team at LineLift as a project coordinator. Eternally grateful to my incredible little sister Viola for believing in me and giving me a second chance. I stared at the post, not blinking, not breathing, not even thinking. For a moment, my brain refused to compute what my eyes were seeing. It was like watching someone else wear my face, my work, my story. Rachel did not work for LineLift. Rachel had never contributed to LineLift. Rachel had never even touched LineLift. But there she was, claiming my company, my achievements, my identity. And the comments, that was the part that cracked something deep inside me. So inspiring. Such a heartwarming sibling story. Congratulations, Rachel. Your sister is doing amazing things. Family support is everything. My parents, of course, had already commented. My mother wrote, "So proud of both my daughters. This is what family looks like." My father added, "Our girls are unstoppable together." Together. They had erased the years I starved, the years I worked myself to the bone, the years they never called, the years Rachel never cared. They wrote themselves into my success, like they were part of the foundation instead of the wreckage I'd crawled out of. Evan found me still staring at my laptop when he got home. "What happened?" he asked quietly but urgently. I turned the screen toward him. He read the post once. His jaw tightened. He read it again. The muscle under his eye twitched. He leaned back slowly, exhaling in disbelief. "She didn't," he murmured. "Oh, she did," I said. "This isn't just stealing credit," he said. "She's using your company's name. That's fraud, Vi." And my mother commented like she orchestrated the whole damn thing. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was stunned. Stunned the way you are when a childhood nightmare appears in adulthood wearing a different face but the same voice. Rachel had always taken from me time, energy, attention. But this was different. This wasn't sibling jealousy or petty sabotage. This was calculated identity theft. "She used my words," I whispered. Evan looked confused. "What do you mean?" Click, scroll. I pulled up the blog I had posted months earlier, the one I wrote at 3 a.m., during a moment of quiet resolve when I felt strong for the first time in years. In that post, I wrote a line, "There is power in building something they can't take from you." Rachel had included that line in her caption, word for word. "She didn't know about this blog," Evan said. "You never posted it on your public accounts." "My mother knew," I said. The realization sank into my stomach like lead. I sent that blog link to her in an email once. She never responded, but she saw it. "You think she forwarded it to Rachel?" I looked at him. There was only one possible answer. Yes. For years, I tried to convince myself my mother was misguided, not malicious, flawed, not cruel. But this was intentional. This was betrayal dressed in pride. "What are you going to do?" Evan asked gently but firmly. I exhaled slowly. I'm going to take back my story. The next 48 hours became a flurry of quiet, controlled action. No yelling, no emotional outbursts, just methodical reclamation. I took screenshots of everything Rachel's post, the comments, the likes, my parents' endorsements. I saved metadata. I archived IP logs. I backed up the blog analytics showing an anonymous view from my parents' city the night before Rachel posted. Then I called someone I trusted, Jade, a cybersecurity specialist I'd met through a tech networking group. She examined the screenshots, the fake email domain Rachel had attached to her profile, and the resume Rachel had apparently sent to recruiters, one that listed me as her supervisor. "This isn't accidental," Jade said. "She didn't stumble into this. She planned it." "I know," I said quietly. "You want me to trace it?" "Yes." She nodded. "I'll get back to you by tomorrow." Evan watched me the whole night with this mix of pride and heartbreak. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't tell me to rise above it. He didn't patronize me with talk of forgiveness. He understood this wasn't sibling rivalry. This was an attack. When Jade called back, her voice was crisp. The fake LineLift email she's using was registered 3 weeks ago. Same hosting service scammers use. And the access points, the IP logs, Viola, it was created from the same geographical cluster as your parents' house. I closed my eyes. My mother didn't just enable this. She helped build it. "So what now?" Jade asked. I opened my eyes slowly. "Now I make sure Rachel understands she doesn't get to steal my life." My first move was small but surgical. I emailed 3 recruiters I had previously spoken to, the ones Rachel had reached out to using her fake credentials. I kept it professional. "Just a heads up, if someone contacts you claiming to work for LineLift, please verify with me directly. There's been an impersonation issue." One replied within hours. "Oh, wow. Yes, Rachel contacted me last week. Thank you for letting me know." A controlled fire, contained, targeted. Then I scheduled a team meeting and drafted a formal internal memo. "LineLift has not employed anyone named Rachel Ortega. Any claims otherwise are false." No names, no drama, just truth. After that, I updated the website. "We are committed to integrity. Please report any fraudulent representations of LineLift staff." Still calm, still factual. But the message was loud, clear, unshakable. Finally, I sent Rachel one message. Not emotional, not long, not angry. Just this: "I saw your post. We've issued a company statement about misrepresentation. Recruiters are being notified. You have one chance to take it down quietly before consequences escalate." She didn't reply. But 12 hours later, the post vanished. No apology, no explanation, just digital smoke. And yet I knew deep in my chest that this wasn't the end. This was only the first crack. The real collapse was still coming. If Rachel taking down the LinkedIn post had been the end of it, maybe a small part of me would have let myself breathe. Not forgive, not forget, just breathe. But people like my sister don't retreat. They regroup. People like my parents don't learn. They reframe. And people like me. Well, I had spent years believing that silence was safer than confrontation. I was done believing that. The day after Rachel deleted the post, my mother called. I didn't answer. She called again. And again the calls like a dripping faucet you can't quite fix. When she finally stopped, she left 3 voicemails, each one increasingly urgent, increasingly accusatory, increasingly drenched in the same old script I knew by heart. "Viola, why are you being dramatic? Your sister is very upset. You've hurt this family. We're all trying to move forward. Why can't you?" Not once did she acknowledge what Rachel had done. Not once did she say the word sorry. Their version of events had always operated on one rule: what Rachel did mattered less than how I reacted to it. But this time I wasn't playing the villain in their story. I was writing my own. When the calls stopped, another kind of noise began. Quiet, invasive, persistent. The kind of noise that grows only when guilt and denial collide. My aunt texted me asking if everything was okay with the family. My father sent an email, formal, stiff, the kind he used for work disputes. "Viola, your mother is distressed. Rachel feels attacked. Please be reasonable." Reasonable. The word tasted like the past, like swallowed grievances and folded dreams. I didn't respond. Instead, I went to work. My team had always known me as logical, composed, the kind of person who could navigate chaos without flinching. But when I stepped into our office meeting that week, they saw something different in me, something sharper. Determination and exhaustion simmering in the same place. The conference room was small, but bright, filled with whiteboards covered in flowcharts and sticky notes. My 3 team members, Calvin, Lacey, and Priya, were already seated. They looked up the moment I walked in, sensing the tension. "I need to address something," I began. And I told them everything carefully, calmly, factually. Not the trauma of my childhood or the years of neglect, but the issue at hand, the impersonation, the fake employment, the stolen quotes, the fraudulent resume, the fabricated email domain. They listened without interrupting. No pity, no shock, just focus. When I finished, Priya leaned back and exhaled softly. "That's not just unethical," she said. "That's identity theft." "And brand theft," Calvin added. Family or not, Lacey said you can't let her walk over you. I nodded. I'm not going to. By the end of the meeting, we had a written internal policy and a clear public statement. It wasn't dramatic, but it was firm, exactly the tone of a company that wouldn't be bullied into silence. As Lacey drafted the statement for our website, I felt something in my chest loosen. It was the first time I'd chosen myself without apology. But what happened next caught me off guard. The podcast I'd recorded months earlier, the one about building career tools without privilege, reached out again. The producer said the previous episode had gained traction, especially among young professionals with complicated family dynamics. They were considering a follow-up segment on resume fraud and identity misrepresentation in the digital age. Would you be interested in speaking anonymously? She asked. You have a unique perspective. I hesitated. Part of me feared what would happen if my parents heard it. Another part, the part that had lived in silence for too long, felt ready. Yes, I said. The interview was calm measured. I didn't share names, relationships, or details that could trace back to them. I simply talked about how difficult it is for young founders and job seekers to protect their work from people who believe they are entitled to it. When the episode aired, it didn't explode, it caught fire, slowly spreading. Through career forums, LinkedIn posts, and online communities, people shared their stories. A brother who took credit for his sister's startup idea, a cousin who used someone else's scholarship essay, parents who lied on job applications for their children, friends who claimed false work experience at a company they'd never touched. The response was overwhelming, heartbreaking, validating. For the first time, I felt like the story I had carried alone was part of a larger pattern, not just my burden, but a collective one. But with visibility comes consequence. 3 days after the podcast dropped, my phone buzzed with a private message from Rachel. It was short. Wow. So this is what you're doing now. Attacking your own family publicly. Don't worry. I'll pursue opportunities that don't rely on you. Hope you're happy. No acknowledgement, no responsibility, no remorse. Just weaponized victimhood. I didn't answer. That night, I made dinner with Evan's simple spaghetti and roasted vegetables. He could always sense when I was spiraling. Halfway through chopping carrots, he paused, wiped his hands on a towel, and said, Viola, you don't owe them silence. I looked at him, the knife still in my hand, but none of them will ever admit what they did. You don't need them to, he said. You already know the truth, and now other people do too. His faith in me was something I tried to hold on to. But the next morning, I woke to 3 missed calls from my father and a voicemail that made my throat tighten. He sounded tired, older, strained. Viola, your mother hasn't slept. Rachel is devastated. What you said in that podcast, you made us look like monsters. Can't we just sit down and fix this? You're blowing this out of proportion. We're still your family. There it was, not an apology, a plea for image control. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even delete the voicemail. I listened to it twice, and the second time something clicked into place. My father said the part that defined everything. You made us look like monsters. Not we behaved like monsters, not we made mistakes, not we're sorry. Just you made us look like monsters. The problem wasn't the harm, it was the exposure. The article came next. A journalist from a major digital publication reached out after hearing the podcast. She was researching a piece on golden child dynamics and identity theft within families. She wanted to hear more about my experience anonymously. I almost said no. But then I remembered all the nights I'd worked alone, and all the nights Rachel had slept comfortably, and all the dinners she'd been celebrated at while I served tables until sunrise. I remembered the steakhouse birthdays she got, the spaghetti I got, the silence that followed me for years. So I said yes. When the article finally published 2 weeks later, the title hit like a strike of lightning. The Golden Child Lie When Family Tries to Steal Your Future. And it trended. Everywhere. And for the first time in my life, the truth was no longer something I whispered. It was something I owned. If I said I felt victorious the day the article went viral, I'd be lying. Victory wasn't the emotion that settled into my chest. It was something quieter, heavier, layered with grief, relief, and a strange, unfamiliar peace I almost didn't trust. Because the truth is, when the world finally acknowledges your pain, you expect the ache to disappear. But what really happens is simpler, you just stop carrying it alone. The article spread like wildfire across LinkedIn, Twitter, career development forums. even Facebook groups filled with people who had been dismissed or overshadowed by their own families. The comments were heartbreaking, validating, and enraging all at once. People shared stories so similar to mine that reading them felt like staring into a mirror from a different angle. A woman who funded her nursing degree while her brother got a fully paid tuition and still flunked out. A man whose parents celebrated his sister's beauty pageants but didn't attend his engineering graduation. A girl forced to turn down a scholarship so her cousin wouldn't feel left behind. Every story was another thread in a tapestry of harm that had gone unnamed for generations. And for once I felt like I wasn't screaming into a void. But my parents reacted exactly as I expected. 3 days after the article went live, I returned home from a meeting to find Evan sitting on the couch, holding his phone, face tense. "You need to hear this," he said. He pressed play on a voicemail he had forwarded to me. It was my mother. Her voice was cracked, but not with remorse, just panic. "Viola, what have you done? Your father and I can't even go to the grocery store without feeling judged. Rachel won't come out of her room. You've humiliated us. How could you do this to your own family? Call us back. Immediately." It was surreal listening to her talk about shame, as if that were the real wound, as if public perception mattered more than years of neglect and manipulation. They weren't devastated that I was hurting, or that Rachel had crossed unforgivable boundaries. They were devastated that the world finally saw what they had spent decades hiding. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without dreaming. And in the morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Not retaliate, not punish, not expose more. Build. Because building had always been the one thing they couldn't take from me. Line Lift expanded faster than I could have anticipated, partly because of the article, partly because the story resonated with underdogs everywhere, but mostly because people were hungry for a space where their experiences weren't minimized. That's when I launched Ghosted Voices, an anonymous platform for people to share the parts of their professional journeys that families, employers, and gatekeepers tried to silence. Not gossip, not slander. Honest accounts of how ambition can be suffocated by the very people who claim to love you. The stories poured in. A first-generation student whose father destroyed her acceptance letter so she wouldn't forget her roots. A young man whose mother told him his career was a phase while buying his younger sister a new car after every breakup. A woman who built a 6-figure business only to have her family claim. They always knew she'd succeed because they raised her right. Reading them hurt, but it also healed. It reminded me I wasn't alone. And I wasn't weak. People weren't sharing because they wanted revenge. They were sharing because they wanted release. By month 4, Ghosted Voices had partnerships with 3 nonprofits, 2 job placement networks, and a university diversity initiative. We hosted workshops teaching people how to navigate family sabotage, financial favoritism, and emotional manipulation in career paths. We created templates for setting boundaries and saying no. We built a mentor network specifically for students without supportive families. I watched the community grow with a mix of pride and disbelief. Evan said he'd never seen me glow like that. I believed him. It was the first time I wasn't shrinking around my own accomplishments. And then, almost like the universe wanted to test me, I received a letter in the mail. A physical letter, handwritten, addressed in shaky cursive. It was from my grandmother. I sat on the couch and opened it carefully, my hands trembling. "Dear Viola," it began. I read the article. "I know it was about your family. I want to say I'm sorry. I didn't know how bad it was. Your parents made it sound like you were rebellious, not hurting. I should have asked you myself. I'm proud of you for leaving, for building, for surviving." I read it 3 times. And then I cried, not the broken kind, but the kind that washes something clean. It was the first apology I ever received from someone in my family. Not perfect, not complete, but real. I framed that letter. It sits on my desk beside the plant Evan bought me when Line Lift hit its first 1,000 users. My parents kept reaching out, but their messages lost their bite. They said things like, "Family doesn't abandon each other. You need to move past this. We've always loved you." But love without accountability is just another form of control. And I was done being controlled. Rachel eventually tried to apply for more jobs under her own resume. Recruiters I'd warned recognized her immediately. One forwarded me an email she sent after failing an interview. "My sister has made it very difficult for me to get work." No acceptance of fault, just another attempt to twist the story. I didn't reply. I no longer felt anger when I thought of Rachel. I felt distance, clarity, a recognition that some people grow only when they face consequences, and she had spent her entire life being shielded from them. Evan asked me one night as we sat on our living room floor, surrounded by takeout boxes and project drafts, whether I would ever speak to my parents again. I thought about it for a long moment. I don't hate them, I said. I just don't belong to them anymore. He nodded, understanding completely. He always did. Because what I learned after everything was simple. Family is not defined by blood. Family is defined by truth, by safety, by respect, by the people who don't ask you to make yourself smaller so they can feel bigger. For the first time in my life, the story I was living and the story the world heard were the same. They couldn't twist it, they couldn't erase it, they couldn't silence it. It belonged to me, and so did my future.